Everyone, welcome back to Standing Strong for Marriages. I'm going to try to do a video today as I've had people ask me a very, very difficult question numerous times, basically throw me these difficult situations, something along the lines of, oh, I got married when I was young, I got divorced, I wasn't a Christian, some time went by, I got remarried again, I recently got divorced for a second time, I'm later in life, I, maybe don't know where my first spouse is, I've since come to know Christ. What should I do? I mean, what should I do given this whole, some people tell me I should not try to restore my most recent marriage. Other people would say, no, you definitely should do that. And I had someone just kind of throw me a comment and it was like, you know what? This is a very tough situation. And I felt like given the nature of this channel, I should at least try to address it. I've always avoided trying to tell people what to do simply because when you meet that next pretty face or someone who's going to be good to your kids or, someone who's going to be able to help you keep a roof over your head or whatever, I really, really doubt that because you saw some guy on YouTube that you are going to totally, go one way or the other. What I mean is I'm going to try to lay out what I think a person in this type of situation or similar is going to need to basically approach if you want to find your own answer. And ultimately, it's going to need to be your answer. It can't be me. There's too many voices. And I'm not going to outsmart everybody out there, certainly. I'm not going to be so winsome as to, try to direct somebody on that. That's not what I'm trying to do. I don't feel that I have the, gift of teaching. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to, as a person who's been standing for about 7 years, who's been reading and thinking about this stuff for a long time, I never remarried, and I always thought a lot about this. So I'm going to try to give it to you as best as I can, in kind of a sequential way. So let me start by saying this. If that's your situation, first off, bravo. I mean, in the sense that you're even asking the question. It's a very difficult question to ask. And I think it shows that, you're a person who is legitimately trying to seek God, trying to do the right thing, trying to find out what do the scriptures say. And let me just pause there and say one other thing. This is also going to apply for what we see as a lot of pastors who aren't going to talk about this, and a lot of churchgoers who have never gone through a divorce or separation and been forced to think about these things. I think it'll help us all realize why people don't talk about it or why they don't spend the massive amount of time it would take simply because of the list that we're going to go through. And so I think that's going to help us think, well, what should we do? If we really want to be serious about, changing the culture, changing where we're going with marriages, be set apart, this is a lot of stuff to look at, and it's not going to be easy. So let me start off by saying this. If this is your personal situation, I would say you may be wondering, do you want to remarry? What do you want to do? This is going to take you no less than 1 year. I would say this could take you anywhere from 2 to 3 years to sort out all these things on an emotional level, on a faith level, and on a conviction level, as well as just mentally grinding through these arguments. It is very confusing. I'd also say that shouldn't be a big shock, as many people don't even feel emotionally ready to be in another relationship, sometimes as long as 5 years or longer even. It's not like most people definitely do not recommend, even if you decide to get remarried, to go out and do that in a short time period. So number two, like I said, I'm not your teacher. I have been doing this for 5 years. Sorry. I've been doing this for 7 years. I don't know why I said 5. Literally, my wife and I split up in the summer of 2014. And so let's start with easy answers, since they are few and far between. First off, is your former spouse or spouses, are they alive? If no, then that really is helpful in your decision-making process, because it seems like with Catholics or with Protestants, there seems to be some agreement that there is no restrictions on widows or widowers remarrying. Really, that the covenant of marriage, if people and when people talk about it in that sense, for those people that view it like that, there seems to be pretty much across the board agreement that death brings that covenant, that marriage, to an end. Okay, so first marriages, second marriages, if you've had two spouses that have passed away, it's pretty much you are free to do it as God wants, and as you like. You're free. But you should know that the New Testament doesn't put marriage on this high priority. It actually puts singleness as a better lifestyle than marriage if you're not dying to go out and have sex, or if you don't need to get married. There's really some interesting things that's quite countercultural, which would kind of advocate and promote the single lifestyle from there forward. So that's definitely a legitimate option. Now, if you're Catholic or you come from a Catholic background, you're going to have to decide about the legitimacy of the annulment practices. So first of all, I mean, maybe it'd be easiest just to start. Do you qualify for an annulment? And I'll leave a card upper right hand. I've done a video on that, and it should be within like 20 minutes. Basically, walk you through what are the types of scenarios that would make a person eligible to receive an annulment, which is basically say that the marriage was never legitimate in the first place. They annul it, and it was as if the marriage, you were never married. But it takes the authority of priests or the priesthood, Catholics would say anointed, for a certain position of leadership and authority within the church in order to make that call. That's something that you can't just do on your own. And one really interesting thing, maybe that we'll touch on later, is that if you're in like a non-covenant marriage, you're not going to be allowed to receive the sacraments. So you're not going to be able to take the bread and the wine, and there may be even other things that you're not going to be able to do as well. I don't know what that would include, last rites, or I don't know. Certainly they would not bless a second marriage if they believe that you're in a current marriage. So those are some interesting things to think about, and I think they do suggest something about your standing in the religious community, maybe even your standing before God. I mean, why is it that they wouldn't allow you to take the bread and the wine? This is something that is a meal or a covenant or sacrament for believers. Well, the simple fact that they're not going to extend that to people who are in violation of some marriage laws, I think says a lot. It's a very, very loaded message. And I'm not Catholic. I went to Catholic high school, but I'll kind of leave it at that. I haven't gone deep into that. Okay, so if you do qualify, then you have to kind of ask yourselves a couple questions. Because after all, there was a Protestant Reformation. Protestant means to protest. It means that there's certain people that didn't believe that some of the beliefs and teachings, the traditions of the Catholic Church aligned with biblical principles. So you might have to sort that out on your own and kind of wonder about, how do you feel about the aspect of tradition being on an equal playing field as biblical scriptures? Do you have a problem with that? Because that's basically one of the key points of, I don't want to say key points, but I definitely have a good friend. He's walked me through it, explained it to me, and yeah, he thinks that tradition is very, very legitimate. Do you believe that? It's important that, it's sin to walk through faith without being able to act, it's sin to walk through life without being able to act on faith. You can find scriptures on that, I believe in James. But it's very important that you are able to walk according to your conscience. That's important. That's very important even when it talked about people, eating meat sacrificed to idols, when it talked about people that would observe certain holy days or not, whether they would take Sunday off or not. There's definitely a New Testament kind of standard or, aspect where it is important that people do abide according to their conscience. None of us have full revelation of all truth. And I mean, you could go down that rabbit hole as well and find out, what exactly do you feel comfortable with? And that's important. Again, some Protestants would say no. I mean, that's the scripture reigns supreme. But that's definitely something that you would want to make sure that you got to a point where you were confident about before moving forward towards like an annulment and then a possible remarriage. Now, for Protestants, it's a little bit different. Of course, Protestants typically believe in the sola scriptura, the supremacy or the authority of the scriptures. So if you're a Protestant, you can start by, asking if both people were believers, or if you were in a mixed type of marriage where one person, maybe if you were a Christian and your spouse was not. If that is the case, you can go and look at some passages in the later part of 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that really talks about that, you're not required to try to do everything possible to make that relationship work when your unbelieving spouse isn't interested. And typically, in all practicality, if they're not interested and they're divorcing you, it's really out of your hands anyway, right? Basically, if they leave and go do their own thing, you don't really have much of an option for many, many people, So, yeah, there's just not a lot you can do. But, it may free you from feeling like that you were part of a failed marriage and that God is going to judge you for that failed marriage, even though it wasn't your choice, that you could have gone and done something better, or if you would have prayed harder, maybe they would have come to believe in Christ, or if you would have been more winsome or more holy or more loving or whatever. We can load a lot of guilt on ourselves. And I think that passage is good. It will help you think about, is any of that legitimate guilt that you may be feeling? Now, the other thing that you're going to have to think about is your view of Calvinism, especially the fifth point of Calvinism, which is called the perseverance of the saints. It's essentially trying to get at this question of how does a person stay saved. So if you became a Christian at any point, and the question would be, what must you do? What is God requiring of you in order to continue to carry that out? Finish your race, maybe would be a term that would sound familiar. So point number one on that, if you believe your spouse fell away from Christ, then you may say, well, initially we were in a Christian marriage, but when they fell away from Christ and stopped following Christ, now actually the better description of our marriage is more like the point I just made previously, the mixed marriage. And so then some of that stuff from 1 Corinthians 7 may apply to you. Maybe it didn't before, maybe it applies to you now. So you may have to decide, am I dealing with a backslidden person? Am I dealing with a spiritual attack? Was it a willful rebellion against Christ that my spouse is basically doing on their own free will? You know, what's going on here? Are we dealing with two Christian people? So that's one thing to definitely think about. On a bigger note, point number two on that, the kind of perseverance of the saints, the once saved, always saved, whatever we want to call it. Again, asking, what about for you personally? What does God require of you in order to be saved? So if on the one hand, you are a five-point Calvinist, you believe that once you're saved, there's absolutely nothing that you can do to, undo your inheritance, your eternal life, your eternal salvation, then basically the answer would be, let's be honest, basically the answer is you can basically do whatever you want, and your eternity is in no danger, no jeopardy. If that's true, you may be very, very tempted to fall into all kinds of temptations. If there's very little, long-term consequences, you may very easily be dragged into all kinds of, sexual adventures, or kind of loose dating, or just having fun with, dating apps or whatever. And maybe it wasn't your initial plan. Maybe it wasn't your initial plan to go out and have, extra marital affairs, or, any kind of stuff, But for those people, I'd say that you are in a particular theological risk exposure. Because you don't believe that really anything is going to get you long term. So just beware of the earthly consequences will still definitely, children out of wedlock, regret, brokenheartedness, damage that it would do to your body or to your reputation. It just hurt your witness or whatever. So you got to be careful. Now, if we move on from there, it gets more complicated. What I mean is, if you say, well, no, that doesn't sound right to me. I do think that there's, if people live in full-on rebellion, or, sin, a lifelong lifestyle of sin after a divorce, that maybe there is, under some circumstances, possible where, a person wouldn't inherit eternal life, that they would kind of themselves walk away from Christ, maybe in the same way that their spouse did. So I'll give 2 points where I think this is important, and it's particularly on the items of forgiveness and on the item of love. So it'll be something like this. One, does divorce, if you're divorcing your spouse, or if you did divorce them and you're unwilling to, go back to them, you may want to ask, in what ways is divorce equal to unforgiveness? Or in what ways is divorce similar to refusing to love them? There's a lot of verses about, love and being loving, and especially with our spouse, as well as loving our enemies. Very interesting morality that we find in the New Testament when it comes to, how are we supposed to react to those who do us wrong. And then essentially the question is, if you under your own definitions, or the definitions, your own understanding of what you find in the New Testament, would live a life of unforgiveness, or live a life refusing to love, if you would, go out and do things that would harm your spouse, or in certain practical ways maybe hate them, that might seem a little rough. But if you kind of have two sides of one coin, either love them or hate them, and you refuse to love them, you could see where some of that thing might kind of come into question. And it may be fair to wonder, well, in what sense would such a person still be a Christian, still be following the things of Christ, still be, obedient to the basic teachings of the New Testament? And the other thing is, on the point of forgiveness, there's some really, really interesting verses about forgiveness and what happens to people who refuse to forgive. There's also some things you might want to look at as far as people who have had their names written out or erased from the Lamb's Book of Life. Very interesting study there, and I guess I could leave you one more card on that to help you get going. But you're starting to see why this is such a long process. You're starting to see why pastors don't really want to get into this because of how long it would take, because of how disruptive it would be. And you can kind of see why a lot of Christians who haven't gone through divorce, they're not really going to be spending a lot of time thinking about these types of things. It's not what you're going to teach in Sunday school classes. It's not what you're probably going to want to teach in your home Bible study or group Bible study. You can imagine all the controversy, right? So this will really take a long time to work through. Now, the other point that I have on that is this point of remarriage. A lot of the controversy is remarriage in some views carries with it possible adultery. And so you would then have to go into that and say, okay, if I do get remarried, and if it is adultery, well, then what was that exactly mean? And I think one of the questions that may come up is, in what sense is adultery different from like a life of drunkenness, a life of prostitution, a life of engaging in like sexual sins, or a life of orgies, or anything like this? Does the New Testament group all those things in the same group? And I think fairly easily you would say yes. Culturally, you would find that it would be no. It would very much be put in a separate category, remarriages, but hence this is why some of the debates get so heated between people. And you come out with some of these memes that are very overly simplistic, that kind of represent one side or the other, very emotional, maybe hellfire, brimstone, all kinds of just weird stuff. So if you work through all that and you say, okay, you know what, I want to be a Christian, I have certain convictions about what it means to be loving, what it means to be forgiving, and you kind of say, well, okay, it seems that adultery is not a good play. It's not what I want to do. It does seem like this is prohibited, and it is warned against concerning second marriages. It won't be long after that or even at the same time simultaneously, when you start to hear a lot of yeah, but arguments from all kinds of people. I'll just give you a couple of the big ones that I see the most often. The first one, abuse. So all kinds of people saying, well, I had to, leave a relationship for abuse. And one thing you have to ask is, is there biblical support for that? Other things, maybe refusal of sex, people say that's a reason. Some people say, if you look at like secular demographic data, that low earnings or money problems is one of the biggest reasons for divorce. And so you're going to have to go and you're going to have to say, well, if any of those things fit my situation, does that give me a workaround for all this adultery language? And does it give me kind of an out for needing to continue to love them actively, to forgive them, to try to rebuild a marriage with them? And certainly you will hear a lot of people say, yeah, it does give you an out. It does give you a workaround. If you've experienced any of these negative features, you're exempt from love, from forgiveness, from, turning the other cheek, from, whatever. So those are some things, and some of those things you can find scriptures, like in Exodus, you can find a story where, there's a teaching that if a woman wasn't given her conjugal rights, food or clothing, then she was given permission to, leave a marriage. It was a slave woman, but it doesn't really seem to be, that doesn't seem to change much. That was something that David and Son Brewer, an author who very much believes that marriage is more like a business contract. He doesn't believe that it's like a covenant at all. And so that was one thing that he brings up in his book. Now, going further on with this adultery bit, you're going to have to get into the Old and the New Testament. And some of the Old Testament things are you'd have to look at, God, he describes himself as a victimized husband who was a victim of adultery. And what did he do? And there's some contention about this. Did he divorce his first wife and take a new one? Did he divorce the people of the Old Testament and find a new bride, as described in the New Testament, people from all these different cultures, not just the Jewish people, but he took kind of made a bride for himself, a church for himself, from all different kinds of people. Some people say, yeah, he did. He divorced her and he took a new bride. And other people say, no, he did not. They would say, what he did? There was a separation that went on for a time, but what God does is that he actually wooed back his bride. And so he wooed her and he was patient with her and he lamented, but he did not take a new wife. So you're going to have to sort that out. Like I said, we have passages from Exodus, refusal of sex, food and clothing. Deuteronomy, there's some stuff about, if you divorced your first spouse, you married a second spouse, you divorced them. Some prohibitions perhaps about going back to spouse number one. That's interesting. So another one would be polygamy. It's something that people argue, that essentially if people were allowed to have multiple spouses at the same time, then you could see that it would open the door for having multiple spouses one at a time. So sequentially, what's the big difference? Some of the things that people argue on that point is like David, Solomon, some of the patriarchs of the Old Testament had multiple wives. Did God reject them? Did God in fact set some of those marriages up? Some people say yes, some people say no. You also have some interesting stuff in the New Testament, Paul's letters to Timothy about setting up deacons and elders. That there were certain aspects of you're looking for people, men that had just a husband of one wife. Why is that in there if New Testament Christians weren't at least in some part thinking about polygamy as a possibility for people seeking to be elders and deacons in the churches, in the New Testament churches? That's debated. Moving on to the New Testament, Christian marriage. We already talked about the Christian marriage versus the mixed marriages. We find a new difficulty in the New Testament where the Gospels of Mark and Luke make it pretty clear that under no circumstances can a divorcee remarry without getting themselves into adultery. But if you flip over to Matthew, you will find in Matthew's Gospel that there is an exception clause that's inserted into that sentence, into that idea, which kind of leaves us with three options. Either one, there is a true exception that under some circumstances I am exempt and I am free to remarry. Another possibility would be know that was actually an erroneous change made by a translator, Desiderius Erasmus, in the 1500s. Basically, he had a kind of a personal grudge. His parents had some issues, and he kind of ended up being a child of divorce. By the time he became a priest, he thought that he would take it into his own hands to change the scriptures, and it seems like there's pretty good evidence that he did do that, and that current translators are well aware of this, but that those changes have not been reflected in the modern, at least English Bibles that we find. Finally, point number 3 on the whole New Testament teaching is in Matthew. There is some arguments over what is called the fornication or betrothal view. And the fornication or betrothal view, I mean, it's very kind of complicated. It essentially tries to look at Mary and Joseph were betrothed to be wed. Joseph said that he was going to, or at least the English Bible, NIV, says that he was going to divorce her quietly. It seems like that he was going to be able to do that in an honorable way, as a way to protect her dignity, but that he was a victim, as far as he knew, of adultery on her part. And so people have to kind of sort that out. What they essentially say is, well, it gets weird. I mean, people go off in a number of different directions from there. They say, well, say for me, for example, if I had say sex with my girlfriend before I ever got married, then that would mean that my wife could always, file for divorce in a righteous way. That I would never be secure because of my, fooling around when I was younger. Some people, that's what they say that's about. Some people say, well, because Matthew treats this betrothal type of engagement situation so seriously that we can imagine it to be as comparable to marriage, which means even though we're not living in first century Judaism, that basically, since Joseph was able to divorce his wife honorably, that in 2020 or the 21st century, that a Christian person could basically pull the same move on their spouse for adultery, and we would have no problem. These are very difficult, sometimes technically difficult, theologically difficult, linguistically difficult things to sort through. And you can see very much, not just from the mental aspect, as well as the number of different things I brought up, you can imagine the different emotions that you'd have trying to sort through, God, this is confusing. God, I want to do this. God, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I want to do the right thing. And I hear 10 different people saying all these different things. It probably took me how long just to talk through it. Well, think of how long it's going to take for you to think through it and to pray through it and to reason through it. It's going to be, some people maybe, if you've been a child of divorce, then you had many years already thinking about and evaluating your parents and their decisions. But if that's not your circumstances and this is all fresh to you, if you're a new pastor, or if you're a new divorcee, or if you're someone trying to support your friend and you don't know what to say, and any or all of us are confused at different points. Yeah, no kidding, we're confused. So that would be basically the path that I think, the things that you would need to think about. And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy for anybody. I described a difficult situation in the beginning of a person who was maybe 2 marriages throughout the course of a lifetime, disconnected with their first spouse. There are Christians that are staying single. You can imagine all the possible disruptions that could occur. And without a doubt, it comes right into the front of your mind where you're thinking, this is a mess. I'm in a mess. It's very emotionally distressing. And but that's kind of the situation that you're in. So might as well give it to you straight. If you're going to start sorting through all this stuff and you want to walk uprightly before God, these are essentially the things that people are talking about and why there is such a controversy around this type of thing. So that's at least my best efforts about, like I said, not to teach you, but how you could get started. Okay, well, we'll be here and we'll keep doing more content that covers some of these things from very thoughtful people, people who are experts, people that have lived through different things. We're going to try to figure it out. Okay, thanks so much.